I've sketched out the Cornflower using a Fineliner permanent drawing pen. Details about the pen can be found in the description below. I'm using Ultramarine and Quinacridone rose. You can use permanent rose. So I'm kind of starting off with the Ultramarine with a pinch of the pink and just varying the colours, working wet on dry using my size 8 round brush. The tip when you're using line and wash isn't to just fill the paint right up to the line. Leave some gaps and just vary the amount of water you're using. So you might want to add a lot more water to make the washes paler, and then a little bit more paint, slightly creamier, to drop it in, sort of damp into damp. And you get a real feel for watercolour doing this. And the actual line drawing kind of takes the pressure off. So as you can see here, I'm literally just painting once, and that's the secret to watercolour painting, just applying the paint and not sort of over painting, because it can look dull. This way there's a lovely sparkle and shine and luminosity when you paint this way. There's a kind of a discipline to it, but it's worth it. So trying a simple exercise like this, just using 2 colours to create all these sort of different violets and pinky violets and bluey violets, etc. You can learn so much. So I've diluted that ultramarine with pink there, and I'm painting that very pale blue violet colour wet on dry. If you look at the photograph, there are light, medium and dark tones on the petals. So if you want it darker, add more paint. If you want it lighter, add more water. It's as simple as that. If it's too dark, just dilute it on the paper. And if it isn't light enough, don't worry, just allow your painting to dry and then paint the darker wash on the following stage. You can either do this wet on dry, or you can actually wet the surface very carefully over the dried paint and then paint wet in wet or damp into wet on top. If you paint wet on dry, you'll get a hard edge, but if you apply paint wet into wet or damp into wet, you get a soft fuzzy edge. So it's really helpful to try something really simple like this. Especially if you're a beginner, you can learn so much and there's not too much pressure. I'm literally going to paint this in 2 stages. Sort of this stage I'm working on light and medium tonal values, and then I'm going to start working on darker tonal values and details on the second stage. So here I'm using a little bit more pink, less blue, to have this sort of pinky sort of violet colour at the sort of bottom area of the cornflower as it goes into the green. So I'm going to use ultramarine and yellow for that. So it's really just 3 colours. You're more than welcome to try out different colours as well. It's a great way of experimenting. Again, I'm not painting right up to the line, the dark line I've used with the pen. I'm leaving white gaps as well. It allows the white and light of the paper to come through. It plays its part as well. With line and wash, less is more. You only really want to do 2 layers, a very light washes and medium washes, and then darks and details. You want to see that pen shining through. So I'm using yellow and blue here, starting off with about 70% yellow with 30% blue, and then dropping in about 50-50, the blue and the yellow in the middle, to allow the sort of outside edges of the stem to be lighter. I actually added a touch more blue in the centre there, just to darken it, wet into wet. Mixing up a little bit more yellow here, Hansa yellow light with the ultramarine, about 50-50, and just painting there just at the top of the stem, this sort of yellow green, wet on dry with my size 8 brush. I'm going to allow my painting to dry. Once the painting is dry, I'm going to build up some darker tonal values wet on dry, mixing up the ultramarine with quinacridone rose. So just getting a slightly thicker darker colour here to make that dark, using my size 8 brush, just literally painting once, not labouring the paint, certainly not to disturb the paint underneath, because watercolour isn't permanent. So you have to kind of gently glide the paint on the surface of the paper there. The reason why we have soft haired brushes in watercolour, it's because it allows the paint to glide on the surface without disturbing the paint underneath. So that's why you need to paint once if you can and glide. If you go back and forth, you could disturb the paint underneath, and in doing so you may get sort of tidal marks, and you may also get muddy colours, and it also dulls your watercolour and you lose control. So just remember, load the brush and glide and try to paint once. So I'm just sort of building up darker tonal values just here and there, looking at the photograph, not exactly copying it, just using it as a reference to interpret the photograph and to paint my own version. So don't be disappointed if your painting doesn't end up looking like the photograph. I would say that's a good thing. Use that imagination of yours as well. It's an amazing thing, and it will allow you to create rather than copy. So I'm just adding some darker pinks here, just at the bottom of the flower there, and just sort of blending and softening with my brush, adding a little bit more of that dark ultramarine and pink, and adding a few sort of spiky areas here, sort of wet on dry using the tip of the brush. Rinsing my brush, taking off the excess water and mixing up the ultramarine, the sort of green that I made earlier, and a little bit of that blue violet to make kind of a neutral colour. And it's fun just using these 3 colours in different quantities to create different sort of darks or just different colours. So here I'm painting a dark blue green down the centre of the stem, wet on dry, using that sort of ultramarine with a pinch of yellow and a pinch of pink. And just a little bit more darks and details here on the cornflower, just to sort of bring it to life, just using just one brush here. So here there's just darks and details, and I always try to work light to dark and then darks and details, and maybe a little light spatter with white paint at the end as well. So mixing up some more ultramarine with the quinacridone rose there, slightly creamier, and I'm just having a spatter of that dark in the centre of the flower to create some texture, but also on the outside of the flower as well to give it a little bit of sparkle. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry once more. What I'm doing now is I'm just lifting off the paint and lifting off any excess paint with the paper towel using a clean, wet brush. And watercolour can lift off because it isn't permanent. You may get a little bit of staining, but you will be able to lift off some of the paint. And the reason why I'm doing this is to create some lighter petals. I got a little bit carried away, but not to worry. I can lift off and create lighter petals. And it sort of brings the cornflower to life and makes it look more 3D. So I'm just picking out a few petals and scrunching up my paper towel to allow me to just pick out that colour and not disturb the paint next to it. So just lifting off a few more lights just here and there, just using my brush and the paper towel. And to stop me from overworking, I'm actually going to sign my name and date it. It's a really good way of just sort of stopping yourself, and you can always look back in a day or so to see if you need to do any more to your painting. So I just wanted to take you through my sketchbook. I've nearly come to the end. I've got one more page left. So all of these tutorials are available on my Patreon membership. Some are exclusive. So if you would like to join my Patreon membership, just click Patreon in the description below. You'll also get access to my exclusive tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. If you have any questions about the membership, please put those in the comments section below. I really hope you enjoyed this simple but beautiful cornflower tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.